Good afternoon. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. And welcome back to each of you who have attended this circle of receiving knowledge offered by your Office of Alumni Relations. As we move through our present time, the From Paws to Claws Alumni Speaker Series is relevant to conversations which help each of us to sustain. As always, the topics support and strengthens the knowledge base of our current students, recent alumni, those who have worn the badge of honor as alumni for years, and friends of Clark Atlanta University. We look forward to greeting you at each webinar. Likewise, we wish to thank the alumni panelists who have presented in the past and those presenting today. We did not seek you out, yet you came with the spirit of a mighty panther, which we are, sharing your expertise when the call to participate went forth. Before we move into today's discussion, let me share a tad bit of history on the Office of Alumni Relations signature event. The Alumni Student Networking event was originally designed in 2008 when Kareem Taylor, class of 2010, in his sophomore year, expressed students should be engaged and learn from our alumni of our one exceptional university. Over the years, we continuously call on members of the alumni community to embrace our alumni in waiting, commonly known as students. We encircle them until they become alumni. As Panther Cubs, they develop through discovery, academically, socially, and spiritually, finding their way as their paws grow claws. And they become fully entrenched felines of service locally, nationally, and globally, while remembering to provide financial support to the institution that placed them on their paths of well-rounded citizens. There is more to the program, which can be found on the CAU website. And speaking of financial report, we are over halfway to reaching our 1 million alumni giving goal. Please remember to share your financial gifts with CAU. As we begin our dialogue, I would like to express thanks to my colleague, Chastity B. Evans, class of 2010, who serves as the program manager in the Office of Alumni Relations. She will be your host, for she created this space for our interaction. Chastity, it is now time for you to begin the exchange.
Thank you so much, Alumna Galen E. Gatewood Joshua, for the admired introduction and credible context. Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for joining your Office of Alumni Relations for Overcoming Barriers to Gender Equity in the Workplace. A phenomenal thank you to Alumna Dr. Michelle Rhodes, Program Specialist for the Office of Online Learning and Continuing Education, for being the technical commander behind all of OAR's webinars. We couldn't do it without you. People of color in the workplace face many obstacles, from the sticky floor of low-paying jobs with little room for advancement, to the broken rug that slows their progress up the career ladder, to the glass ceiling that makes it harder for people of color to reach their top jobs. Companies are investing and recruiting people with diverse backgrounds, but even as the numbers of people coming in the door are rising, barriers continue to remain. We encourage panelists to discuss efforts of millennials and Generation Z to create change within the workplace and enable people of color to succeed. Together, we will explore and research on these factors that impede our leadership trajectories and look at how some companies are creating a roadmap to encourage advancement. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into your Q&A box in the Zoom control panel. I will bring them up during our Q&A section to discuss. So let's get on down to business. Up next is our first alumna, Jare J. Williams. Alumna Williams is a member of the United States Air Force Judge Advocate General's JAG Corps, where she is commissioned in the rank of Lieutenant Colonel and serving as an attorney officer. During her career with the JAG Corps, she functioned as a prosecutor, trial defense counsel, appellate defense counsel, and staff judge advocate. She has also been assigned to bases in Arizona, Texas, Maryland, and Colorado. In addition, she deployed in support of Operation Enduring Freedom to Southwest Asia, where she was the sole legal counsel on military justice, international, fiscal, and contract law matters. Lieutenant Colin Williams graduated in 2000 from CAU, where she received a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science. A former Philip A. Corboy Fellow in Trial Advocacy, Lieutenant Colonel Williams graduated in 2005 from Loyola University Chicago School of Law in Chicago, Illinois, where she received her Juris Doctor degree and her certificate of specialization in trial advocacy. Alumna Williams is married to an active Air Force chaplain, Lieutenant Colonel Reverend Christian L. Williams, and they have 2 children, Christian and Micah. Welcome today, Alumna Williams. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Awesome, awesome. I don't know which one to call you. Should I call you Alumna Williams or Lieutenant Colonel? Because I know you earned those, so
It's whatever you're comfortable with. They're just titles, so it's whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, well, since we're in an alumni setting, I'm gonna make sure you are an alum today. How about that?
That's good.
Awesome. Well, we're gonna go into your first question for today. So the lack of women in leadership is not simply a representational issue. Focusing on getting more women in leadership positions not only treats women as token hires, it excludes men who are made to feel as though engaging in diversity and inclusion is a win-lose fight for a seat on the leadership table. What's your take on the U.S. Air Force and its strive for gender equity in the workplace?
So thank you for that question. So there's this article, it's called the Brookings Institute, and they wrote it. It's published on their website, and it's called Women Warriors, the ongoing story of integrating and diversifying American armed forces. So in that article, there are 3 key things to note. One, the military has been one of the most progressive institutions, as with racial integration, which started in the years after World War II, sorry. 2, how the US military also embodies a traditional, conservative, and in some ways macho culture. And 3, how it took a long time to make the military fully accessible to women. Notably, it was only in the Obama years that all combat positions, including in the ground forces, were open to women. So women remain just 16% of the total US military force, 20% in the Air Force. Female officers, such as myself, find it difficult to imagine advancing into the general officer ranks, with only 6% of female officers making it to the very highest echelon in the military, which is 4-star general. The experiences of women in the military trends towards being inequitable historically. Promotion opportunities hinge on performance evaluations and endorsements from an overwhelmingly white, male-based leadership demographic. And there are a number of complexities that contribute to this performance evaluation dynamic. However, I believe the Department of Defense and the Air Force specifically are leaning towards the right direction when it comes to gender equity. We recently in the Air Force opened up a diversity and inclusion shop and office at the headquarters level, which is right now focused on figuring out ways to attack this issue. Our top leaders, from the Commander-in-Chief, President Biden, to the Secretary of Defense, who is our first Black secretary, that is, the Honorable Lloyd Austin, are clearly committed to increasing gender equity. Over the past 5 years of my 15-year career, I've seen some historic and promising achievements regarding upward mobility and promotion opportunities for women, all based on law and policy changes. Just last week, we in the Air Force JAG Corps learned that the first Black general officer in our Corps will be a woman, one of my mentors. In short, as long as leaders at the very top continue to not only endorse gender equality, but also implement policies to reduce barriers, then we are on the right trajectory. I'm of the opinion that we may not be able to change minds, but we can change law and policy, forcing a change in mindset.
I agree. And, just what you stated regarding the mindset and the policies and, the actual tactics in order for people to become corporations to become more diverse, inclusion wise. This can go into your second question regarding the work environment, where differences are valued. Everyone has an opportunity to advance, which is why both women and men are more likely to rise to senior leadership positions and cultures that value equality, which is kind of what is trying to go on right now, happening. What will it take to collectively keep our economy from experiencing the projected 3.41 billion loss expected in the wake of women and single parents' departure from a workforce, because these environments are non-existent at majority of these corporations?
So another good question, and one that we actually grapple with in the Air Force. The authors of that article I mentioned earlier, they noted that in the US military, when it comes to addressing the issue of underrepresentation, it's important to examine the barriers that keep women from pursuing service, right? And most notably, that in the military, it remains very hard to have a family while in military service. Moreover, there are several studies that have revealed that despite efforts to improve women's military representation, mid-career female officers attrit at twice the rate of male peers. So this hits very close to home for me, as I am married to another military officer and we have 2 young children. The military is unique from corporations and organizations in the civilian sector in that its uniformed personnel have to contend with multiple moves, overseas assignments, deployments away from their families, and stressful working environments due to the intensity of the missions they support. They are supporting wars and conflicts. All of these factors are magnified for those uniformed personnel who have significant others and our children. So the Air Force sent me back to get another master's degree, for which I'm grateful. And I was able to write a paper which was published about some of the struggles military parents often face with quality childcare, especially for dual working and single parents. In fact, ensuring their children receives such quality childcare is the #1 reason why women who are mothers separate from the military. The fact remains that one parent, usually the women, even in dual working couples, tend to bear the bulk of the childcare responsibilities. Now, this is not really my story, as my husband and I partner to raise our children. However, my role as a mother subjects me to a unique mother's guilt that my husband does not have to grapple with. And COVID has just blown the cover off of the way we do business in the military and has revealed even more the importance of quality and adequate childcare. As I previously alluded, the culture of an organization is set by its leaders. However, when women are not in these leadership positions, our voices are hollow, if not non-existent. So women have to find ways to amplify our voices, whether it's through partnering with other women in their industry, or recruiting other women to join them in their fields, or aligning themselves with those male leaders who can be a mouthpiece for them to ensure that our contributions are valued and that we create a representation pool from which people can be selected. Finally, professional and affinity groups, both affiliated and non-affiliated with one's organization, they're helpful in amplifying our voices. For example, I'm an active member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the Links Incorporated, and I'm also on the Air Force's Women's Initiative team. And so all of these affiliations permit me to partner with women to advocate change.
That's awesome. And that is amazing. And we are so proud of you for definitely making a change, within the military, and having these young ladies, look up to you so they can follow within your footsteps. Although you are, one of those other people in the sorority, but it's okay, because we still love you guys. And the great thing about it is, at the end of the day, it's all Greek love. As long as we help each other, that's all that matters. So, because this is a fight against us. It doesn't matter what type of group we're in, what type of organization, because at the end of the day, only thing that the corporation is looking at is the skin of the color of our skin. So thank you so much for that. We really appreciate you. Thank you again. You're welcome. Thank you again, Alumna Lieutenant Colin Williams, for the strategic insight and knowledge. If you all have any questions for Alumna Lieutenant Colin Williams, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel now, and we'll be sure to get to them during the Q&A session. Thank you again, Rockstar. Hope you travel safely. Next up is Alumna Brittany O'Doy. Alumna O'Doy heads the Diversity and Inclusion Division at Georgia Tech Research Institute, known as GTRI, where she serves as the Institute's inaugural diversity practitioner. She leads and implements strategic initiatives that enable GTRI employees to solve world-class technical problems in an inclusive environment. Alumna O'Doy prides herself on being a change agent and cultural catalyst for furthering workplace inclusivity in STEAM fields. She is a second-generation alumna of Clark Atlanta University, earning her master's and bachelor's of arts in accounting. Wow, that's awesome. She is a member of the Atlanta Diversity Management Affinity Group, the American Association for Access, Equity, and Diversity, known as AAAED, and the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education, known as NADOHE, as well as the Society for Human Resources Management. Alumna O'Doy is also a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Phi Tau Omega Chapter. Thank you so much for joining us, Alumna O'Doy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me, Alumna Chastity. I'm excited about this, and I appreciate being able to represent for the class of 2010.
Yes. That is it right there. We're going to celebrate our reunion this year because we didn't have a chance to celebrate ours last year.
Our reunion, but we will
celebrate. So we're showing out this year at homecoming. So just be prepared, Ms. Joshua. We're going to go ahead and go into our first question for today for you. Are you ready?
I sure am.
All right now. Inequity in the workplace is a practice. It's something employees do, which is why leaders need to continuously manage behaviors that cause inequality in the same way they manage safety, costs, and productivity. I'm positive Georgia Tech Research Institute has several policies or diversity and inclusion initiatives in place for their leaders, students, and employees to translate equality into a set of behaviors, norms, and routines. How effective are these policies and initiatives to raise awareness to fix the problem?
Thank you for that question. I want to first begin by informing our audience about GTRI, or Georgia Tech Research Institute. So GTRI is an 85-year-old organization. We are a university affiliated research center, or UARC, and of course the university we're affiliated with is Georgia Tech. but we are a Department of Defense contractor. And we're aligned with Georgia Tech. So that has us under the DOJ umbrella of being an OFCC compliant organization for the federal contractors that we employ. We also are equal opportunity employer. And so as their inaugural diversity and inclusion practitioner, these are the things, the policies, the governance, and the compliance measures that I'm often asked and tasked to make sure that we're aligning towards. When you talk about inequity in the workplace, gender barriers and how we can eliminate those, my office has stood up several initiatives in the past 5 years that I've been there, some of which are our wellness rooms. So our wellness rooms are spaces or hoteling sites for those gestating or nursing mothers to have that privacy, for employees that are transitioning in the workplace to be able to administer medication. They're also a place that we're transitioning to. We'll have aromatherapy and other self-care tools if an employee just needs a time to go and breathe. Because similar to my other panelist, Jag Williams, we do work to protect the nation's security. We have a lot of different stress, and you could take your pick of the different stressors that 2020 had to offer. So this is something that we have included to not only aid in inequity in the workplace, but also just to help with self-care and wellness. This has allowed us to look at the new approaches to the work-life balance. As you all know, there was a, kind of butts in seats or brick and mortar way of looking at a workplace. Now we've been able to prove that we can protect our nation from our homes. But there are certain other things that, regardless of inequality in the workplace, we also have to be responsible for. That is why shortly after the murder of George Floyd, in August, we launched 6 inaugural employee resource groups. One for which we call Access for our employees with visible and invisible disabilities, Affirm for our LGBTQIA community, Her for our employees that are women or those that identify women as women, so it also includes transitioning women, Identify for our BIPOC and minorities and persons of color population. We've also launched Serve, which is for our military service members, their families, and allies. These are all things that we've tried to do to, we know the statistics. I appreciate Alumna Williams talking through those statistics. They are, disparaging, and we're doing what we can to move the needle. But these are some of the programs that we've helped to, as she talked about, reduce attrition and increase our retention rates. We noticed at GTRI that there was a population of women and persons of color leaving the organization within 5 to 7 years. So we really wanted to look at those exit surveys, that employee relations data, as well as doing stay surveys of why our employees have stayed. Since it is a very old organization, we've had folks who started as student assistants and are now still there as lab directors. What makes you stay? As we talk to them, some of those initiatives and thrusts that I talked about earlier are what we have evolved into. So to your point, inequity is something that is present in the workplace, but I hope that at GTRI, along with my coaching and counsel, we're doing what we can to move the needle of inclusivity.
Awesome. And I know you are down there kicking butt. You are moving the needle and everything else down there. And we are so proud of you to be on that campus doing that. So
Appreciate it.
Go ahead, girl. Is it possible to finally build the flexible, collaborative, outcomes-focused workplace we all crave? And I know you kind of touched base on this just a little bit in your first question. Is it finally time to step away from the rigid notion of an ideal worker who participates at certain hours on certain days and always prioritize work over family and health?
I believe it's possible, and Chastity, honestly, I believe it's a strategic imperative. In order for organizations to remain with a competitive advantage, institutions, organizations, firms, public or private, are going to have to look at a different way for our employees to show up at work. I say that because if last year taught us nothing, it's that productivity in the world can continue. You are allowed, I always say now I live at work because I work from home. You should be allowed to, take a Zoom meeting while you're, stopping by the bank to drop off a deposit slip. You should be allowed to, have your dog present in meetings. And it's really going to talk about, it's going to go into senior leaders looking at multi-generational workplaces, what it looks like with all the different work styles. I know at GTRI, we are fortunate to have 5 generations present in our workforce. So we've had to look at other dimensions of diversity and inclusion that are different from our salient identities, not just talking about gender and race. How do people show up at work? What are their needs? We have in place teleworking agreements and flexible work environments. Because we are a Department of Defense contractor, the nature of some of the work we do does require our employees to be on site, just because they hold those top secret clearances and what they're delivering. But we are offering that flexible time, meaning whatever your core hours are, as long as you're able to get that work done, you might not necessarily be kind of clocking in at a 7 to 3 or an 8 to 4 environment. And I believe that it'll be a strategic imperative for all organizations to look at this. Otherwise, you'll have a huge retention problem. I mean, racial battle fatigue, as you all know, is a real thing. Psychological safety is a real thing. Burnout is a real thing. And I can't help but continue to quote, I know 2020 was the year of vision, but if it showed us nothing, it's that there are different ways to do things, and we're going to have to ask and plead with our organizations to look at other models around employee engagement, or you'll lose your employees. I always say people don't leave companies, they leave managers. So if folks can't move over from being project directors and team leads and more into being people managers, you're going to end up in a boardroom by yourself.
Wow. That was a lot right there. And I hope you all that's on the call took notes, because that was highly informative. How did you guys respond to the verdict this past week, especially you being within the diversity and inclusion area?
So I love that you asked. I've always appreciated being a part of my Wakanda, which is this community. We were going through the dress rehearsal for this program during the time of the verdict. I appreciated being on here with you young ladies and having that moment of silence so that we could, take that verdict in, reflect, and then, get the business done. That is, Erica and myself are direct colleagues in the work we do. That is how we get through it. But also I always try to make sure that I'm grounded in Isaiah 41:10. The Bible talks about faint not. So being someone that is inaugural, being first, that, our sorority always prides ourselves in, it takes a lot of pressure, but to whom much is given, much is required. So the way that I got through that is knowing that God's will was done and that it was time for me to do my work, because that's what he's entrusted me to do that next day. I didn't reflect, I didn't have a chance, but the way that we are able to kind of take that in at GTRI is we're going to have what I call our community conversations, which will allow a fireside chat and just an opportunity for our African-American and BIPOC employees to unpack. And that'll take place tomorrow afternoon. It's just a time that we're putting on everyone's calendar. You can attend if you want to. No really posed questions, nothing formal like this, but just allowing us to be in that space and breathe. If we were all back on site, I would do something and kind of have a lunch, but I just want to have everyone join our WebEx and be able to have community with one another. And that's how we'll get through it. And that's how we'll celebrate the verdict. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it did wholeheartedly. And by all means, please send us the information. We would definitely come and support you.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Alumna Odoy, for the fundamental tips and for your extreme knowledge. If you all have any questions for Alumna Odoy, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel, and we'll be sure to get to them during our Q&A session. Now on to the next modern day freedom rider is Alumna Erica L. Knight. Alumna Erica L. Knight is a cultural strategist and collegiate student advocate whose experience in higher education spans across enrollment management, student affairs, and graduate admissions. A graduate of CAU, Knight has dedicated her career to diversifying advanced degree programs by establishing pipeline programs between minority-serving institutions and top-tier research institutions. In her role as Assistant Director at Harvard University and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, she recruits and retains underrepresented populations within the Chan School of Public Health. Alumna Knight has formerly held positions in her career field at Northwestern University, Emory University, and Spelman College. Alumna Knight is civically engaged and an active member of the National Conference of Race and Ethnicity, CAU National Alumni Association, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, Boston Alumni Chapter, just to name a few. She has received several accolades for her humanitarian efforts and dedication to excellence. In her limited spare time, Alumna Night enjoys traveling to the Caribbean, sampling various cuisines, attending trunk shows, and fellowshipping with families and friends. How are you doing today, Alumna Night? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Doing well, thank you. I'm so privileged to share the stage with these ladies and learn so much as I'm able to contribute. So thank you for having me today.
No problem, no problem. Thank you for accepting the invitation. We're going to go ahead and go into your first question for today. Gender equity is a systematic issue, and as much making real changes requires getting the whole organization involved. What recommendations can you give for institutions of higher education in terms of strategizing and implementing key practices to truly unlock the potential of gender equity in the workplace for people of color?
Thank you, Chastity. Yeah, that's such a paramount question. The first thing that comes to mind is this really needs to be a top-down approach. So when you think about higher education, the harsh reality is institutions of higher education can be places of elitism. And when you're in that, you can very well get into those institutions and start looking down upon the people who you pledge to help. So with that, you need a top-down approach coming from the chancellor, the president. And when you look at these institutions, I'm always curious to know, how long have you had offices of diversity and inclusion? How long have you had chief diversity officers? I am privileged to sit in a space where we've had our office for well over 20 years now. But when you look at other institutions that's been around for 100+ years, and they're just now getting these offices 5 years ago, 7 years ago, that really speaks to the commitment or lack thereof. So when it comes to actually what the strategy is, the first thing is pay. Pay these people what they are worth, pay what they have been educated to do. We need to break down those pay gaps. The second thing that we need to do, which Alumna Williams alluded to, is to build this into policy, and to build it into policy in a way where it's ongoing, it's strategic, and it's sustainable. As we progress in this world, we shouldn't have the same stories as previous generations when it comes to any of our isms, be it gender discrimination, be it racism, so on and so forth. And the way that we change that is to have a policy shift. With regard to actual implementation, I've seen some things that have worked and have not worked, but I think chief amongst them is to be able to create spaces within the workplace where you can do storytelling, because I believe storytelling is a form of activism. You can do storytelling, but you can do it in that space without retaliation. So one of the ways that I've seen that carried out is really through ERG groups, employee resource groups. It's a great way to build community. It's a great way to tell your story. It's a good way to show the variety in experiences and stories. The other thing is reverse mentoring programs. Brittany spoke to this as well when you talk about multi and intergenerational workplaces. When you also talk about the triumphs that we've overcome, taking those who are in senior leadership positions and leadership roles and pairing them with those who are entry level or junior level, just to see what their experiences are, how things can change to offer a different type of perspective. Also, when we look at modern day society, we look at fashion gurus and fashion houses like the Gucci, the Tommy Hilfiger, the Timberlands. And one of the things that I think was good for all of them when they came under scandal, when it came to gender and racial discrimination, they were quick to cultivate diversity and inclusion committees, but what they failed to do was acknowledge their history. So when Gucci had the situation with Dapper Dan and they basically took his intellectual property, they were very quick in their public response to say that, hey, we've had this mishap, but let's acknowledge the history of where that comes from. So with that being said, as we set up these different committees, as we look to change the policy, we also need to be explicit explicit about what that history has been and how we want to change it moving forward. So those are just some initial things I will offer.
Awesome, awesome. Now I know you talked about, the representation, and how long have these companies actually had a diversity and inclusion office. I mean, some of them just probably received one or started to have one maybe 2 years ago, when the pandemic kind of started hitting and when all of the climate came down with all of these killings and stuff like that. So they didn't want to lose the people who is helping them make their profit. So I'm sure they had to come up with something. So according to the Harvard Business Review, improving representation will not fix the culture and environment that excluded women and people of color in the first place. How do you see the culture shifting to fix the systems and assumptions to cultivate an organizational culture capable of harnessing the power of all genders?
Yeah, definitely. Such a heavy question, such a weighted question. I think 2020 has been a transformative year, and it's been a year to make us sit back and reevaluate our humanitarian efforts, not only in the workplace, but just personal reflection. So with that being said, the biggest shift that I see, particularly in institutions of higher education, you will see them going from a DEI model, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, to a DEIB model, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And that B means so much because now we're going from spaces where, oh, we want you here, we want you included, but now the question is, do you actually belong? Are we cultivating curriculums and safe spaces and sacred spaces where you can function well in this space and know that you actually belong? I kind of think about it as creating chocolate milk, right? When you think of creating chocolate milk, you have the milk and then you can put the chocolate syrup in. But guess what happens? The chocolate syrup goes to the bottom. It isn't until you stir it in and stir it up that the syrup then gets in there. It's included. It belongs because it has the space of knowing I am the flavor, I am the texture, I am what changes this from ivory to chocolate milk. So I think of adding that B in the same way that we think about chocolate milk. The other thing, I've seen a trend in inclusive measures in HR. So Brittany talked about earlier about lactation rooms. There's also been new HR policies around paternity leave, which we haven't had in the past. Then, especially within the space of academia, gender neutral bathrooms. There are even apps on certain college campuses where you can go on the app and locate a gender neutral bathroom. And the last thing that I would say with regard to shifting the culture is I think that the world is finally understanding that diversity and inclusion is everyone's job. It's just not the chief diversity officer. Diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging hits everyone in your corporation, everyone within your institution. So with that being said, that's incorporated into finances. Are we budgeting for this efficiently? Do we have the resources and do we have the money to execute those resources? So knowing that it's just not one person's job and not putting the onus on marginalized groups, but also putting the onus on non-marginalized groups to be trained and to be educated, because there's a far difference between training and education. And to take that as a self-liberty to make sure that we are collectively doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, it's a shift that I'm excited to see across the board.
So just a little follow-up, quick answer, well, quick response. In terms of the DEIB, do you feel at Harvard and within the state of Massachusetts, do you belong? And I'm just saying that because of the climate, like I spoke earlier, that we are currently going through with the verdict and everything like that. Some people are a little heated, from last year, from what took place with the presidential election and everything. So do you feel like you belong there?
Definitely. Thank you for that question. I definitely do. I feel as though I belong and I feel as though I'm wanted and needed because I can observe classroom situations. I can observe situations in the office where it's clear what gap I'm filling, and not in a tokenized way, but just through my lived experiences and through my 15 years of expertise in the field. And I see that a lot with students as well, incoming students and prospective students. With regard to the state of Massachusetts, particularly Boston, we just elected a Black female mayor. So it's interesting because I'm transitioning from Chicago, where we have a Black female mayor. And before that, I transitioned from Atlanta, where we had a Black female mayor. So I've been in all of these spaces where there's been Black female leadership, and it's been exceptional with regard to improving our budgets, making diversity, inclusion, and equity work of focus, and putting the money behind that. So not only do I feel as though I belong, I feel as though they anticipated my presence because they understood the worth and the value that I bring to that space. And that's also demonstrated in the way that we treat students as well.
That's because they know that you are an honorary freedom rider for diversity and inclusion. And I really wish that Dr. Rose would have queued up "Who Run the World?" Because you came from 3 states, and if I'm telling you something, I don't know what it is. It's telling you might be running for mayor, 12 years, 5 years down the line. You never know. So, but thank you so much, Alumna Night, for your intellect and your determination to continue to push forward. If you all have any questions for Alumna Night, please type them into the Q&A box in your Zoom control panel now, and we'll be sure to get to them during our Q&A session. Thank you again. All right, now, so our last but never least, Alumna Rukia Thomas. Since 2018, Alumna Thomas has served as Atkins Vice President of Regional Business Development and Strategy for Greater Atlanta. She leads business development out of Atkins office, Atlanta office, supporting more than 80 cities and counties in the region. She delivers strategic support to EDPM with the primary charge of strengthening our client relations with expanding our market position to advance the greater Atlanta community. Prior to Atkins, Alumna Thomas was Chief of Staff at MARTA, where she led the strategic development and execution of delivering MARTA's financial and operational transformation. Prior to joining MARTA, Alumna Thomas led the community's planning and policy adoption that launched the historic Atlanta Beltline in 2006. Service leadership locally and nationally includes the board for WTS Atlanta Chapter, Council for Quality Growth, and the Public-Private Partnerships Gold Council of Urban Land Institute, to just name a few. She is a recent graduate of Leadership APTA and Leadership Georgia, as well as Made Mass Transit's and Atlanta Business Chronicle's 40 Under 40 list. Wow. Welcome, Alumna Thomas. How are you doing today? You don't even look like you're over 15, girl. So you're doing something.
I'll take it. Thank you.
Have you found the fountain of youth and forgot to tell everybody?
Thank you. You're sweet.
Well, we thank you so much for joining us today. And we're going to go into your first question for the afternoon.
Can I just say, though, I am so proud of this panel. Oh, my gosh. Taking notes is an understatement. Wow. It's awesome.
I had to upgrade to the legal pad because I was over here. I took up all of my little, sticky notes with Alumna Williams. So I was like, all right.
A great job in putting this together.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, studies have consistently shown that boosting diversity and gender equity in the workplace benefits organizations and their bottom lines. And researchers have also confirmed that having more women in the workplace increases well-being for all employees. What's your take on Atkins and the U.S. current climate? Are they doing everything they can to achieve equity in the workplace, or are you guys getting there, or?
Well, I think we're more on the path of getting there. So Atkins is an engineering firm, engineering design and project management. that serve the infrastructure and transportation spaces of cities and counties. So, your roads, your bridges, your transit, your aviation, everything that moves. And so, and I've been in this space now going on, I guess, about 15 years and, 18 overall in the career, but in this particular infrastructure and transportation space. And it is a predominantly white male space, right? So that's no secret to the industry. And that's no secret to consulting engineering firms, definitely. But we're getting there, because one thing I can honestly say that I'm proud of Atkins in is that when the murder of George Floyd happened and the civil, protests started happening all over the US and world, people started looking internally, right? Because we spend most of our wake hours where? At work. So for the first time in Atkins history, employees of all diverse backgrounds started looking internally, saying, what are we doing? And because we're a global firm, we have a US market, a UK market, a Canada market, a Middle East market. So we have about 5 key markets around the globe. And so we're a global firm. And so there was a modest kind of response sent out by a global president, and every region has its president. So I'm 2 removed from the president of the US, but then there's a global president. So the only response we heard was from a global president. It was a modest response. And so that created a lot of question, including from myself. I sent a very detailed, specific email along with other people saying, what are we going to hear from the president of US market? And because this is happening in the US, and what are we doing as an agency? And what is your DEI plan? And do you have, some plans to create some support spaces to support your staff that are going through the trauma of what's happening in the community? Because if you think that we're turning it off when we come to work and that your bottom line won't be impacted, then you're crazy. When I say we had some very frank conversations, and being at the VP level, so in my firm currently right now, in the US market, there is at the vice president level, there's the SVP level, and then there's the president of the US market. And so the highest ranking women of color in the organization is only 4 of us at the VP level. There's 3 white females at the SVP level, and the president of the US is a white male. And so at the SVP level, it's majority white males. And like I said, the entire organization is. So there's 4 of us at the VP level. And so you can understand that when we started speaking up, and it was happening all throughout the ranks, they had to respond. So, and they respond favorably. Since George Floyd's murder, our ED&I, and I'm going to take the B. Please understand, Sora and Alumna and Erica. I'm going to take the B back to my organization. I love it, and I love the chocolate milk comparison. But we're getting there, because I will say that they're doing a good job in responding, because they had to respond because we weren't there. So when the murder happened, what happened basically is that they took our ED&I committee that was about 12 folks that wasn't really diverse. It grew to about 125 folks. They created a steering committee, which I am a part of, to help guide this ED&I committee that was led by a white female. And I'm sharing these demographics because they matter in the voices at the table and how they're able to serve people of color. Because if you're not a person of color, it's really hard for you to know and understand what is needed by people of color. And so I've been helping them understand that, and they've been responsive in creating ERGs. I now, when it happened, we only had 1 ERG, and that was Women Inspiring Leadership. So it was 1 ERG for women to increase the gender inequities at our engineering firm. They didn't have any others. And then they proposed a BIPOC, and I challenged it and said, right now, the injustice that's happening in America is happening to Black people, by large majority. And so we need to have a ERG focused on Black and African-American employees. And so that advocacy led to us standing up a STAND ERG that was for Black and African-American employees US, because we only represent 6% of 5,000 employees in the US. And so I chair that, and I'm on the steering committee of ED&I. And since then, we've had a global racial justice conversation in our company that they thought a lot of people wouldn't attend. They predicted 200 to 300. We had 1,800 employees from UK to Canada to US attend and listen to people of color tell stories to their colleagues that happened to them personally. So I connect also with that storytelling. Storytelling is a huge piece of helping people create empathy, helping others understand who wouldn't otherwise understand. And when they see accomplished, smart fellow colleagues that they work beside also have been pulled over by the police, also have been racial profiled, also have been treated badly or taken to jail, or, you know, had just egregious situations. I've been spit on in my life by a white female, you know, so I say all that to say, once they heard all these stories, it started creating conversations that we have continued quarterly called Courageous Conversations, where it has been a safe space to talk about race from all backgrounds. And it's not just for Black employees, it's also for their allies, people who want to understand and grow. And it's been very healthy for our organization. So we're getting there.
That is so awesome. I mean, it seems to me like you guys are almost there. I mean, if not there, especially
we're on track.
Especially to have a conversation like that and to have a huge response like that. Yeah, you're onto some great things. And I appreciate Ms. Galen E. Gatewood Joshua for allowing me to have this platform, because that is something that we are learning and that we want to implement here at the Office of Alumni Relations. Tell our story, allow our alumni to tell their story, and allow them to share their expertise, because otherwise, you know, what are we really here for? You know, we need to ensure that just like you guys have your back and you empty your pocketbooks to CAU, we need to have your back too. So I appreciate her for being our honorary millennial, because that's what she is, and for rolling with it. Yeah, she is. She has like 18 phones. I don't know how she does it, but anywho. So in your role as VP of Senior Regional Business Development and Strategy Director, you must be very deliberate regarding your development as a leader. I mean, how were you able to take lead in shaping the George Floyd conversation after the verdict was released and take ownership of your career choices as a woman of color to your teammates? And I know you kind of spoke a little bit about it when you went into detail about your about the storytelling idea, which is awesome. And I wouldn't mind if we could. Can we join? No, that's what. Okay. But yeah. So how are you able to lead in this climate that we're currently in?
Well, I definitely was watching, and I posted immediately. I was probably the first to post in our global company. I put it on our global Yammer. And it was very simple. Just, you know, today, you know, I feel a little bit lighter today. I feel like hope has increased in America for, and, you know, justice. And granted, you know, I am not a, you know, DEI professional as my colleague and Sora, you know, is. However, you know, to me, you know, if you don't have that position in your organization, which we did not recently, they've already set aside budget to hire one, but you know, then you need to stand up and do what you can as an individual, because you do understand the plight of our community. And so not only did I post it on Yammer, I also have been in anticipation of the verdict, planning a panel discussion with our US president, our UK president, and our Canadian president, which is happening on June 1st. And it's a global town hall with all three. I'll be moderating to ask them basically, how has the last year since George Floyd's murder, which we can officially say now, changed you as leaders? How have you, you know, not only change you, but change how you lead within our organization, and how we anticipate policies to change that will close the pay gap, that will close the fact that there is no, you know, there isn't any representation on our SVP, our Senior Vice President leadership of color. Like, what things are we doing now so that 2 to 3 years we look different? Because you cannot attract the graduates of, you know, HBCUs, like, A&T, which graduate the highest number of engineers, in addition to Georgia Tech, who I say the only reason their numbers are high because they get the AUC students in their program. I have to educate people on why Georgia Tech got the high number of African-American engineers. However, the point is that how do you attract these students to Atkins if they don't see, leadership of color all the way through the ranks? It stops at the VP level, and that's not good enough. So I want them to be able to talk about that openly, candidly, from a personal and professional perspective. And they agreed, and it's the first time ever they've been able to do it. And they're a little uncomfortable with it. They're having me do like 2 and 3 pre-meetings before it happens, so they can kind of get a feel for what kind of questions are going to be asked. But the reality is that having these discussions that have not been done before in this global firm, to me, is a response to this verdict. It's a nudge forward. It's a step in the right direction to get to a better organization for someone else. I may not even be there in 5 years, but someone will enjoy that looks like me, an organization that's more diverse if I'm not.
You're making history, Alumna Thomas. You're the other freedom warrior. So thank you. That, I'm sure the George Floyds, the Emmett Tills, and all the other African-American, men and women and children, are really shining down, because as you stated, it was hope. I mean, it gave us a little hope that finally America is waking up, to give us justice. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you also for breaking it down and for captivating us with your journey. Because that's definitely important. Like I said, you're making history. If you all have any questions for Alumna Thomas, please type them into our Q&A box in your Zoom control panel now, and we'll be sure to get to them during our Q&A session.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you again to our alumni panelists for bringing their passion, experience, and gems that were released today to go forth with you. We will go ahead and take some time for questions now. Just a reminder, please be sure to type your questions into the question box in your control panel. Now is the time to engage with your alumni and to definitely network. So it looks like we have a few questions. We're going to kind of go back through them a little quickly, since we are 2 minutes out before 1, and we don't want to keep you guys too long if you're on lunch break, okay? This question is a toss-up question, and it's from the National Alumni Association President, Devin White. He said, how has CAU prepared you for the work you currently do? Anyone could take it.
I'll start. I went from a HBCU to a PWI at Penn State, and I tell people every day I appreciate Penn State for the graduate education they gave me. However, CAU prepared me, no doubt, for my career, for the woman that I am, for the mother that I am, for the professional that I am, because when I speak in these public forums and I talk to the leaders in this engineering firm, and mind you, I've been on the public side at MARTA as well. So I've been in, predominantly, African-American, company. It was kind of 50-50 at MARTA. And then, I'm in a majority white, and even at, I've had a different environments, and it really hasn't mattered. I show up the same. And let me tell you what that means is that, sometimes you find that in people of color don't want to speak up, don't want to say that to the president. Do we really want to make them uncomfortable? And when you start talking about matters of DEI, and especially in this climate, some of us are trained to be cautious or, filtered. And I'm always professional. Please understand that. However, I have learned and been trained to have difficult conversations in a professional format where others can understand that these are things we need to talk about. And you can always find a way to talk about the difficult matters if we all show up and we're here to have a real conversation of understanding and empathy and create a place for us to be honest with one another. And as a believer, truth always, truth never fails as far as I'm concerned. And I have never been held back or retaliated against in any role I've been in. And I've had a few leadership opportunities in being honest, with CEOs, with presidents, with board members. I'm an honest broker, and it served my career well.
Awesome. Next question is from Michelle Jones. She says, what strategies would you suggest for institutions in the process of trying to recruit a chief diversity officer? There has already been a failed search. This is for anyone who would like to answer.
I'll chime in. Such a good question and such a, unfortunately, not unique problem. So the first thing that I would say, if it's already been a failed search, let's do an assessment. Let's do an assessment as to why that search failed, where you were getting candidates from, were you using a headhunting agency? Let's dive deep into the assessment of why it was failed. The nuance with this is that when you look at it, there's really no accrediting body to say what is the blueprint and how do we measure success for chief diversity officers. If you're in a situation of higher education, do you measure that through students in terms of the yield of students coming in? If so, that's not necessarily accurate because that doesn't mean they're having pleasant experiences just because they're graduating. If you do it in terms of a company looking at how many people of color you have, again, that won't be accurate. So one of the things that I say, considering that currently that doesn't exist across the board, is to build out in detail, what do you foresee being the responsibilities of this role, and how will those responsibilities and job duties be measured? I can tell you, as someone who headhunters contacted about a couple roles, the roles that I've turned down in the past is due to two reasons. One, they didn't have the budget to support what they wanted me to execute from a programming standpoint. And two, it wasn't a clear-cut and defined way of measuring success in the role. And when it's not a clear-cut and defined way, then people tend to be more hesitant. And then also it becomes this somewhat of a scapegoat thing, right? If we say we want you to do everything with regard to people of color and changing diversity and inclusion, again, how do you measure that? What speaks to my success in that role? So what I would encourage is that they really build out, what does that look like? They have the financial and the human resources to execute that. And also talk about how does support look like for that role within the institution across the board, not just in that particular department or office.
Awesome. I know we had one more question, but I think she actually got Brittany, for some odd reason, she needs to be promoted to panelist. I don't know what happened. Oh, okay, there she is. Okay, so last but not least question. This is coming from Alumna Nutanya P. Hemphill. She said, best strategies to speak generationally about diversity and inclusion. What are ways to speak to students or anyone who may be numb to what may look like discrimination or other forms of racial justice? And I guess if Brittany, if you wanted to take that, since we are running out of time, please do so.
Can you repeat the question, Chastity? I'm sorry, I was having connectivity issues.
Oh, no problem at all. This is from Alumna Nutanya P. Hemphill. She said, what are some best strategies to speak generationally about diversity and inclusion? What are ways to speak to students or anyone who may be numb to what may look like discrimination or other forms of racial injustice?
I think one of the strategies that I would lead in with when you say that someone is numb, I think I talked about that racial battle fatigue and burnout before, is making sure that you are allowing yourself to be in a humble position, to be patient and to listen. When someone lives their lives in the margins, like I often say, or a marginalized group with systemic racism or a history of institutionalized oppression, they often aren't having that seat at the table. They aren't being able to lift as they climb, and they aren't having their voices recognized. So when someone acknowledges and comes to you in that state, the first thing you can do, in my opinion, is to listen. Once they are able to advocate for themselves, if they are talking about things that you can offer a solution to, then that's something you want to lean into. Otherwise, sometimes people just want to be affirmed, seen, and heard, and just want to have their opinions voiced. People that are not in our community don't often realize, as my colleague and VP talked towards earlier, there's so few of us in those spaces, in those seats, and at those tables that we're even sometimes shocked or ashamed to speak up. So if anyone ever comes to you, in my opinion, with that type of thing that they want to get off their chest, I would say to be humble, to listen and be patient, and allow them to know that they're seen and affirmed in their opinion. You don't always have to offer advice when people vent to you. Sometimes you can just listen.
Exactly. And sometimes that's all they need is for you to just listen, a listening ear. Well, that is all.
One quick thing.
Okay. No
Just
problem.
one quick thing from that. If you are currently a student, be it undergraduate or graduate, and you want to know more about that question, I always say, look at how you can incorporate your activism into your scholarship. Because when we look back at revisionist history, part of the problem with revisionist history is that it's not enough Black and brown people in it. So if you can be the person who's creating the new scholarship and creating the new training and telling the new stories, and you have that as an indelible footprint in your literary or scholarly canon, that speaks volume. So if you're a student listening or you're considering going back to school at any level, consider how you can incorporate your activism into your scholarship.
Amen.
Can I add one thing on to her comment? Just one quick thing. To the students that are at Clark Atlanta now, if you are complaining about your professors, about your workload, about how hard they push you, about how they stay on you, just take what I said to heart, that all of that prepares you to show up. That's all I can say to you, is that know that it all prepares you to show up. Being hard on you, acting like your mom, dad, or whatever, you feeling like, well, listen, my parents are here. All of that love you're getting that you don't realize it right now, it will help you show up when you're the only one at the table and when you're having difficult moments and difficult situations in life. That's all I want to say.
Awesome point. That needed to be shared. So, all right. So our panelists, if we do have 3 more questions left, but our panelists will answer those individually, and we'll be sure to get those back out to you, because we do apologize for running out of time, but we want to be, on time, so you can go back to work. So thank you all again for the questions. Please stay in contact with our alumni, whether it's on LinkedIn or IG or Instagram, Twitter or Facebook, whatever the case may be. Please stay in contact with these people, because you never know what your path may take you to. So also, please look on our social platforms and follow us, like us, comment on things at CAU Alumni Relations. Also, please look out for our next upcoming event, which will take place on May 6th. And it's going to focus around real estate. So if you are looking to purchase, if you are looking to ensure that you have everything you need ready to go for this world and everything, and you want to sign up your life away, please make sure that you take a look at this and listen in to this real estate webinar before doing so. All right, we are out of time. So we thank you so much for your presence and your energy. We hope that you have an awesome weekend and that you enjoy your piece of labor. Have a great day.